Story 1. My dad kept half his paycheck in cash rolled up in a sock. That way he had cash on hand in case my mom overdrafted the bank account. It made sense, but why was my mom overdrafting the account so frequently that they needed a precaution against it? Story 2. Not exactly a money habit, but my parents taught me that you should always put food groceries toward the front of the conveyor belt and other items, like toiletries and paper products, at the back. I assumed that was a store rule. When I got to college and went shopping with my roommates, I began to correct them when they placed toiletries at the front of the belt. Then I realized there was no rule. My family was just on a tight budget, and we would ring up the food first in case we ran out of money during the grocery trip. Story 3. In the past, when utility bills were paid by check and mailed in, there was a method to sending the check at the right time so that it appeared to be paid on time, but it would not be deducted from the account until after the paycheck was deposited. This was a common practice among those with limited financial resources. Others could simply pay their bills without such concerns. Story 4. Back in the day when people still kept their bank balance with a physical check register, my mom would add $1 to every charge to maintain a cushion in her balance. She has since declared bankruptcy twice and has nearly no retirement savings, so it's clear that was not a great habit. Story 5. Just paying the minimal required monthly amount on credit cards causes interest to accumulate quickly. Now, as an adult, I am completely averse to debt. Story 6. If someone gives you something nice and expensive, you can only use it sparingly. If you use it too much, you don't fully appreciate it and don't deserve it. I had many nice lotions and makeup products that expired because my mom said I was using them too much and not savoring them properly. As I got older, my roommate said, "This cost a certain amount of money, and you were using it every day." Story 7. We had an envelope of cash in a drawer, possibly containing $20 bills, totaling around $200. It was primarily for my mother, but my siblings and I could take some and deduct it from our allowance of $4 a week. Once we were in college, we would simply take a $20 from the money drawer and realize that no one was keeping track. I rarely have cash, so I recently reinstated the money drawer in my home. Now I always have cash on hand, and my husband is confused, asking, "Can't we just go to an ATM?" Story 8. Dad kept a significant amount of cash in the house. Mom had unlimited access to it, which isn't unusual, but my sibling and I also had unlimited access. We could take money without asking and simply inform them of how much we took. Usually, if we asked, Dad would respond, "You don't need to ask. I made the money for you and your sibling, so it's practically yours. Take as much as you want." Story 9. When I got a job in high school, I had to go downtown to pay the phone bill in cash because that was always the first utility that went unpaid when my parents ran out of money. If I wanted to talk to friends or receive calls for work, I needed the phone. Story 10. For years, I kept a penny in my right shoe, under the insole. I can't remember why I did that. Story 11. Only paying cash for things. My mom never had a credit card. If she didn't have cash for something, we simply didn't get it. Story 12. My dad did well for himself. He took care of us, but he never spent much money on himself. In his 40s, he bought a Rolex and later on a sports car. I asked him why he only bought nice things for himself those 2 times. His answer is something I do myself now. He told me that if he really wants something, he makes himself wait 6 months. If he still wants it after 6 months, he figures he will always want it, so he might as well go out and get it. My mom spent excessively on everything. My dad bought 2 nice things in his life. One he still uses every day, and the other he sold because he was done with it. Story 13. This used to be a common farming practice, but I don't know if it is still true now. I grew up on my grandparents' small dairy farm, where they also had chickens. My grandma kept a jar in a kitchen cupboard for her butter and egg money from selling homemade butter, which we churned, and eggs to the neighbors. I don't remember how they managed their household finances, but that money was for her to use as she wanted, including paying us for chores related to the chickens, such as cleaning the coop. We also had ranch-related chores, but that was partly funded by the dairy budget, along with fresh milk and butter. Several other farm women we knew had similar jars for their egg money. Story 14. My mom watched the clock every Thursday night to run to the store. It turns out she knew exactly when my dad's paycheck would arrive and she would take cash out each time. Apparently, that's not healthy relationship behavior. Story 15. Before electronic payments and self-addressed stamped envelopes were popular, my parents would drive to all the utility companies and drop off the check because they did not want to pay for the stamp. Story 16. I know people who keep a small notebook in their car and write down the price of gasoline every time they fill up. To clear up any confusion, tracking mileage is perfectly common. However, tracking the price of gasoline at each fill-up doesn't make sense to me. That's all I was asking about. The price. Story 17. Aim for a big tax refund. When people explained that you are giving the government an interest-free loan, I realized it does not make much sense unless you have a hard time saving money. Then that yearly windfall is the only way you are getting your brakes replaced or undergoing a root canal. Story 18. My dad would occasionally take us to the $1 show. It was literally $1 per person. We would beg to see movies that were almost done in theaters and maybe 4 to 5 weeks away from being released on VHS. He would make us search for change around the house to go. He also popped popcorn and brought it under his shirt, sometimes ours. Story 19. My dad has told me multiple times that he has envelopes hidden around the house with money in them to help us take care of things if anything ever happens to him. However, he refuses to tell me where they are, so if something does happen, I am not sure what the plan would be. We have lived in this house for over 20 years, and I still don't know where any of them are. Story 20. My mom would mail checks for bills a couple of days before her paycheck arrived at the bank. I was 7 or 8 years old, and we'd be in the car with her frantically writing checks. Instead of putting them in the drop boxes at the utility company or phone company, we'd mail them, which would delay the process by a couple of days. When I tried this with my now husband, I suggested, yeah, let's just mail in a paper check, and by the time it clears, our money will be in there. The expression on his face was the first time I realized this was not the right approach. My mom managed to keep our lives together through sheer grit and resourcefulness, and I love her dearly. Story 21. I asked my dad for a donut at the grocery store, and he calmly explained that if I got one, both my siblings would want one, and then so would my mom. Oh, so it's a small thing, but when it becomes many small things, it's a big thing. That makes sense. In hindsight, it's just a single dollar. Story 22. When I married my husband, I learned that his family had a concept called walking around money. If you go to an ATM for a specific need, you always take out a little extra. We were getting tips for wedding vendors, and my husband handed me $40 as he walked back to our car from the ATM. I was confused. He said it was some walking around money. I had never heard this before but was happy to have it, so I didn't question it. I love having cash on hand for a random treat. Now, I'm converted to this unusual money habit, but it's through marriage, not by blood. Story 23. My dad uses the same computer, television, and phone until they become obsolete or start to hinder his daily life. After about 1 to 1.5 years of that, he finally breaks down and buys a new one. Story 24. Keeping a coffee can full of receipts. I discovered that my mom was not a ballerina. She was a dancer and was able to write off many daily purchases on her taxes as an independent contractor. Story 25. Always have $20 on hand when going out. If you are mugged, they will likely not stab you if you have at least $20. Story 26. Adults would never accept money from someone else. They would refuse to take money if, for example, you paid for tickets or bought something for someone else that they asked you to get, and then refused to accept money for it. My dad's family would hug him and sneak money into his pocket. He would later find it and be infuriated. Story 27. Whenever she would go out, or especially if we went away, my mother would leave out $20 or $40 in a very visible place for the robbers. She believed that if they went through the trouble of breaking in, they would be content with the $20 and wouldn't wreck the place looking for more. Story 28. My mother was an educated, independent woman. She never had a credit card or a bank card. Every morning, she came downstairs for breakfast and asked my dad for cash. Dad would lay out a $20 bill for her almost every morning so she could buy lunch. Felt oddly performative. Why didn't he just give her enough cash to last the week? Story 29. My mom always had cash hidden around the house because my dad was not good with money, and she wanted to ensure we had emergency funds. All the coins we collected went into a big jar, which we used to pay for a Disney vacation. Story 30. My siblings and I all got small jobs at 14 to 16 years old. Dad always insisted on doing our taxes because it was so complicated. It turns out he was just withholding our tax returns. I didn't realize you could get money back from taxes until I was 21 and my friends were talking about what they were doing with their tax returns. I tried filing the next year by myself. He had already filed listing me as a dependent and continued disagreeing with me on it. During COVID, I really could have used those stimulus checks to get by. I had to file an identity theft affidavit against him to make him stop. Story 31. If we ever saw someone about to discard recycling, such as bottles or cans, we would take them home to deposit. We made frequent trips to the thrift store to donate items because they offered us a percentage discount on our purchases. This was how we were able to afford new toys and school clothes. Story 32. My mom had a habit of putting $100 bills inside books. She had hundreds of books. When she passed away, my family and I went through every single book before selling and donating them. We found $900. My aunt, my mom's sister, hid away large bundles of cash throughout her house. She also had massive quantities of expensive face cream that cost $400 a jar, among other things. When she passed away, we found over $5,000 in cash, and I took home about 8 jars of that fancy face cream. It didn't make any difference for my face compared to a cheap jar of Olay. By the way, they grew up in the Great Depression, and although my aunt became somewhat wealthy during her lifetime, my mom never did. But they both hoarded money, just like their mom did until she passed away. These days, I am also stashing $100 bills in a secret spot, in case there's a run on the banks. Grandma told me all about that from back in the day. Story 33. Whenever my brother and I go out, I taught him to always stick a $100 bill in his sock. Wallet stolen? Phone died? You can figure something out with $100. Story 34. Never using credit cards can be a principle worth adhering to. We could exist without running water or power, and they would still refuse all loans. I wouldn't borrow from anyone except family, which I believe is good practice. Interestingly, they had no problem rummaging through my and my siblings' bags if they needed money. They didn't need to ask before doing it. I could wake up the next morning and find my savings emptied. It was all communal in the end. I'm not sure why they maintained the idea that we ever owned any of it in the first place, but I never questioned it while growing up. I believe this is poor practice. Story 35. My mom always said that money spent on vacation doesn't count. You can spend any amount on anything while on trips, which, for a lower middle-class family, was somewhat of a stretch. However, we could usually afford it, so I always went along with it. My husband, on the other hand, thinks this is unreasonable and believes vacations should still fall within a budget, as does everyone else I've shared this rule with. Story 36. Not my family, but credit agencies always said you should hold 10% in debt. It never made sense and still doesn't, but the little credit debt I have earns me higher points and more offers for credit. Story 37. My dad has 2 separate bank accounts at different banks. One account is for long-term savings and a safety deposit box, while the other is used for day-to-day expenses, covering monthly bills. This was born out of the experiences my grandfather's family went through during the Great Depression. Story 38. My dad put a lockbox around the thermostat, but left his wallet and piles of cash on top of his dresser. Story 39. Parents didn't teach me much about credit while I was growing up. They had credit cards but emphasized never spending more than what was available in our savings or checking accounts. As a child, this meant I paid for everything in cash until I was old enough to have a bank account. After that, I primarily used my debit card. I applied for an emergency credit card, but the credit limit was so low that I only used it for emergencies. Unfortunately, this meant I didn't start building credit seriously until well into my 20s. Story 40. My sister keeps cash in the fridge because she thinks it is fireproof. Both my mother and sister keep loose notes between the pages of the Quran for emergencies. Occasionally, I would flip through the pages while cleaning and find a few thousand worth of RM100 notes in there. Story 41. People appreciate having their house paid off. If you had $240,000 in 2016 and put $40,000 down on a house, you would have taken out a loan at an interest rate of 3.3% with a savings rate of 0.8%. It would cost you about 2.5% to carry the money. Now you can earn 5% and gain about 2%, factoring in the interest minus the mortgage interest. However, you gain financial flexibility. It's easier to use savings to cover all your bills, including the mortgage, than to go to the bank and ask for a loan when you need money. Banks are advantageous when you are doing well. Otherwise, not so much. Story 42. Spending your entire paycheck as soon as you can and then hoping for financial freedom when you realize how broke you are can be stressful. The weeks between paychecks were very challenging for me as a child, and it became so normalized that I repeated the same behavior once I started working. It's safe to say my husband was surprised to learn the extent of my financial knowledge when we were dating in our early 20s. I appreciate his patience in teaching me financial responsibility before we got engaged. Story 43. Don't ask about how much others earn or their bills unless you plan on covering them. Even then, it's better not to. It was ultimately just my dad being evasive and uncommunicative. Story 44. I used to try to hide my paycheck money in my DVDs, but the problem was that I always remembered which ones. And if I hadn't, I could have gone through each one. I struggle with saving money. Story 45. My parents almost always purchased larger appliances and cars used, and then wondered why they had issues almost immediately. This was to be frugal, not because they couldn't, but the frustration of the problems was never worth it in the long run. Story 46. This isn't me. However, my coworker, who is 19, told me how her family doesn't believe in debit or credit cards. So, she goes to the grocery store to buy something with a checkbook and writes it over by about $100 every time she needs cash for something. Story 47. My mom used to make us put money in our socks and sometimes use it as a last bathroom tissue. Then when we went to a restaurant and didn't like it, we paid with our foot and backside bills. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.